It's a very interesting story. Thousands of Welsh people came to this city in the 19th century. And there's no city like Liverpool in that sense, due to the predominance of the Celts. The Irish is the largest of the communities, but the Welsh is behind them, then the Scots, and then the Manx people. I mean, in 1880, they used to say there were 120,000 Irish-born people in Liverpool, 80,000 Welsh-born, 40,000 Scottish-born, and 5,000 Manx-born. And there were a few Cornish people here as well. I would say around 2,000 or 3,000 Cornish people. So no wonder some people have said that Liverpool is the only foreign city in England. It's so different to every other city, different to Manchester, different to Newcastle, different to Sheffield, because of this tremendous Celtic input. It's a kind of a Celtic empire in exile. And historians of the city have tended to put a lot of emphasis on the Irish. The Welsh have not been given so much predominance because so much of the sources have been in the Welsh language. And that's why my book will be of help to historians in particular to know more about the contribution of the Welsh people to Liverpool. I mean, there were Welsh people around Liverpool long before Liverpool was even mentioned as a village. And it all changed, of course, with the decision of King John to give a charter to Liverpool. He had a soft spot for Wales because his daughter, Siwan, was married to the last Prince of Gwynedd, Llywelyn, but he doubted the Irish. And he wanted somewhere different to Chester, where he could keep an eye on the Irish and then less on the Welsh. And King John did a great deal for Liverpool. I know he's been given a bad press by historians, but I find that he gave Liverpool a boost and made it into a village which had a charter and able to invite people to come and live in that village. As far as the Welsh are concerned, the most influential Welshman that we know of came in during the Tudors' reign. His name was Dafydd ap Gruffudd. He was a follower of the Tudors, and they sent him to Liverpool to keep an eye on the citizens of the town, well, the village at that time, and also to collect taxes. And he became an important figure. He was made mayor of Liverpool in 1503, after only 9 years in the town, and then another stint as mayor in 1515. After his death, the office of collecting taxes was given to his wife Alice and his son-in-law Henry Akers, and they lived in Wavertree. And during Dafydd ap Gruffudd's period in office, the town of Liverpool the village of Liverpool is spelled Lerpwl, L-Y-R-P-U-L, which is very much like the Welsh name for Liverpool today, which is Lerpwl, L-E-R-P-W-L, which means the place of the pool. And it was in the 18th century, with the building of the docks, that the Welsh were attracted in large numbers. And they flocked here to do work with the Irish on the docks, especially the Old Dock, opened in 1715, the Salthouse Dock, opened in 1753, and then George's Dock in 1771. And then St. George's Dock was called after King George, but it was known by the people of Liverpool as the Welsh Dock, as it was there that all the Welsh boats would unload and unload until it was closed in 1900. And I've got a wonderful slide of that later on when Mike will show you a number of the slides that I've got for you this evening, which will help, because I'm bringing in those slides people that I have no time to mention in my talk to you. Now, on the northern edge of St. George's Dock were the slate yards. And Welsh-speaking folk were in charge of these slate yards. And boats from Portgnorwick, Bangor, Carnarvon, and Porthmadog could be seen unloading stone and slates each week. The boats gave a different appearance to the River Mersey. In 1701, there were only 102 boats on the river. By 1751, this had risen to 543, and in 1783 to 3,420. Many of those involved in the slave trade. There was some Welsh people involved in the slave trade, like Owen Pritchard, who was a brewer, and also Richard Pennant was the MP for Liverpool, and the one who built Penrhyn Castle near Bangor, and who owned, later on, his family owned the large slate quarry in Bethesda. But it was largely the Welsh and the Irish who built the docks. In particular, King's Dock, completed in 1788, and the Queen's Dock, completed in 1796. And they also came to work in the St. James's Quarry, which is next to the Anglican Cathedral these days, where it used to be. When it was closed, it was turned into a cemetery. And that is where many of the Welsh were employed in the quarry of St. James's. And the Welsh speakers were in the majority in the cotton factory in Vauxhall Road. And Liverpudlians called it the Welsh Factory. A number of the Welsh men rose to prominence at that period. There was a man called Robert German. He was from Anglesey, and he was superintendent of the Bootle Water Company, which was responsible for the water for the people of Liverpool. While John Owens of Flintshire was the chief overseer of the Duke's Dock, and William Morgan from the Vale of Clwyd was his deputy. And their influence was such that some English leaders in Liverpool began to be annoyed at the Welsh takeover. But one must remember that the Welsh were delighted at the welcome they received in Liverpool. And in particular, after 1789, when they built their first Welsh chapel in Pall Mall. The Welsh were settling down at that time, mainly around Tithe Barn Street, James Street, Chapel Street, even as far as Pitt Street. And the English often call these streets Welsh Court, Welsh Yard, Welsh Chapel Court, instead of their proper names. And now we're going to see some slides to help me to give the story of Liverpool. And the first slide will be George's Dock. It's a wonderful slide, and it gives you a very, very good idea of the size of the dock and the boats that were around it at the landing stage here. And to think that that has disappeared since 1900. So that's St. George's Dock. And then we move on from there to St. Mary's Church in Walton. And the reason why I show this is that one of the first Welsh poets that came to Liverpool came here as a curate in 1753. His name was Gronwy Owen, and he was a fine poet, but he could not settle down anywhere. And he had a great longing for Anglesey, but nobody wanted him back in Anglesey. And he had to leave. He left Liverpool after 2 years, but during that time he was in charge of the grammar school. And the building is still within St. Mary's Church in Walton today. And he was employed as a classics master in that grammar school in 1753 to 1755. He lost his daughter, Ellen, during this time, and he wrote a very superb poem in memory of her. So that's St. Mary's and Gronwy Owen. I haven't got his photograph there. I've never seen his photograph, but that shows the church where he came to from Donington near Oswestry. And then the next is John Gibson. Now he came as a family, the family of the Gibsons. They were thinking of going over to America. They were from Conway. And when his mother saw the condition of the boats that were going to take them to America, she said, no, I'm not going on those coffin boats. I'm going to stay in Liverpool. And she stayed and gave birth to 2 other great sculptors. And he was the one that really became world famous as a sculptor out in Rome. He was taken under the wing of William Roscoe. And William Roscoe used to invite him to come and out once a week, all the way to Springwood, to his mansion, to see the books and the prints that he had of the Medici family, because Roscoe was an historian and wrote on the Medici family. And he gave him a great boost and told him that you must go to Rome, which he did in 1517 and stayed there till his death in 1766. But he came back to Liverpool more than once, and he was asked to do the mausoleum, which is by the Anglican Cathedral, where the remains of William Huskinson was killed by the rocket on the opening of the Liverpool to Manchester railway. So he's the man that is world famous. And in the Walker Art Gallery, there are hundreds under lock and key of his drawings. And they did open it to me a few years ago. I spent a whole day there going through his drawings. And we should have an exhibition on him in the Walker Art Gallery in the near future, I would say so, because he's one of the great Liverpool characters. And we move on to another famous person. She's Liverpool and Wales, Felicia Dorothea Hemans. She was born in Duke Street, but she loved Saint Asaph and Rhiallt and that area, and they lived there for years and years. And she wrote poets, and people in Wales regard her as a Welsh poet. People in Liverpool regard her as a Liverpool poet. So she belongs to two worlds. Felicia Hemans, who died at the age of 39. She came back to live in Wavertree at the end of her life, but she loved also Dublin because she married an Irishman called Brown, but she kept her name Felicia Hemans. So we move on to another delightful character, William Rhys, known as Gwilym yr Eithog, Hiraethog mountain near Llansannan. He was from Llansannan, came to Liverpool in 1843, stayed here till 1875, then went to retire in Chester, and I will be mentioning him further on tonight in my talk, because he's a polymath, one of the great figures of 19th century Liverpool. And when he died, he was brought back to Smithtown Road Cemetery, Toxteth, and his grave is to be seen in the Welsh part of that cemetery, where there are hundreds of Welsh graves in Smithtown Road Cemetery. And we move on to another early Welsh poets of Liverpool. After Gronwy Owen, he was known as Peter Jones. He came from Eifionydd, Bryn Engan, by Brincir. He called himself Pedr Fardd, Peter the poet, and he was very influential in Pall Mall Chapel because he became the teacher of the Welsh school in that chapel for 20 years. He also was a tailor. He did a lot of things and wrote a lot of hymns which are still being sung in services. And I'm going to show you another great poet who came to live in Liverpool for a while, T. Gwyn Jones. He belongs to the 20th century. He came to work on another newspaper, Welsh newspaper, in Paradise Street, called the Cymro, the Welshman. And this man, although he was never educated in any university, became the professor of Welsh in the University College of Wales, Aberystwyth, in 1919. One of the great Welshmen of the 20th century. And he enjoyed his time in the Cymro offices in Paradise Street with Isaac Fawkes. And Isaac Fawkes taught him a great deal, and he also mixed with a lot of the early socialists of Liverpool. So he is a figure that belonged to Liverpool, like the next person that also does. And this is George Glyn Davies and his brother, George M.S. Davies. This is the plaque that we put on their home in Devonshire Road a number of years ago, 20 years ago. John Glyn Davies became the professor of Welsh in the University of Liverpool in 1920 till 1935. And George M.S. Davies was one of the main pacifists of the First World War, as far as Wales is concerned. They were brought up in Devonshire Road here in Liverpool. And from Devonshire Road, we go to Pall Mall Chapel, the first Welsh chapel that was built in 1789 and then extended in 1799. And so much activities happened in this building. And we move on to the world of the Eisteddfod. And this is the entrance to the Eisteddfod that was held in Liverpool, the first Eisteddfod held, National Eisteddfod of Wales, that was held in Liverpool in 1884. And it shows you the Welsh costumes and support Welsh industries, success to the Welsh woolen trade, and then the Welsh are very thrifty and hardworking. And the second Eisteddfod that came to Liverpool was in 1900. And it was a Liverpool Welshman who won the chair at that Eisteddfod, a person called Pedrog. He was a minister in Kensington, Reverend J.O. Williams. And his chair is to be seen within the town hall in Liverpool these days. And the last Eisteddfod was held in Sefton Park in 1929. So we move on to showing you the papers, community papers that we have in Liverpool. Since 1959, we've had the Bont, means the bridge, and then we've got the Angor, which I edit, and it's been going since 1979. And it comes out once a month, and it's well appreciated and gives the news of the different parts of Merseyside and Manchester Welsh as well. So the last slide, for the time being, is of the Reverend John Thomas. He was a remarkable character. There were 4 brothers in Liverpool of this family. They were originally from Holyhead, and then they moved to Bangor. There was Owen Thomas, who was a minister in Princess Road Chapel. Then there was John Thomas, who was a Welsh independent in Cross Hall Street and later Netherfield Road. He was a great temperance man and also a great politician. He was the one that discovered David Lloyd George and gave him great support to win his first election in 1890. John Thomas died 2 years later in 1892, but he came to Liverpool in 1853 from Carmarthenshire. And it's a good photograph of him. So thank you very much to my assistant, Mike, for your good work. So we move on now to the building of Pall Mall Chapel that I mentioned, but also the Anglicans. They were very far-sighted, and they felt that they had a responsibility to assist the Welsh who came to Liverpool, because the Chapel of Pall Mall belonged to the Calvinistic Methodists, and they were not a denomination in those days. They were part of the Anglican Church, and they left in 1811 to form their own denomination, which today is called the Presbyterian Church of Wales. So the Anglicans, especially the Bishop of Chester, and Liverpool as part of that diocese, he decreed that Welsh language services should be held in Liverpool in St. Paul's Church and also in St. Nicholas. And a Welsh-speaking vicar was appointed called Lewis Pugh. And they had a curate called John Davies. And they were in charge of the services that were held at St. Paul's Church, and then later on in the evening at St. Nicholas Church. Both churches had a Welsh choir and a Welsh band. And the Liverpool Corporation also stepped in and paid Lewis Pugh £60 a year as a Welsh reader among the Liverpool Welsh. From 1793 to 1813, he was an integral part of the life of the Liverpool Welsh. But however, he nearly lost his life one Sunday morning, 10th of February, 1810, in St. Nicholas Church. 22 worshippers were killed that morning when the stone holding the clock tower moved. And the whole construction fell through the roof. And Lewis Pugh was on the point of coming into the church when one of the teachers from Moorfield School turned to him and said, "For God's sake, Mr. Pugh, turn back." And he took heed of her voice, and his life was spared. But the teacher who warned him lost her life, as did 17 of the 22 children that she had brought that morning to the service. All Liverpool Welsh had good friends. We can't say that the Liverpudlians have been bad to us, have been cruel to us, have been persecuting us. We can say the other way. You can see from the corporation. What other city, what other town council would give money to keep a Welsh man to teach Welsh people Welsh? In 1793, let's be fair. And the same happened when people like William Rathbone I and William Roscoe especially came to meet these Welsh people. One of the most eccentric Welshmen of all times was a man called Richard Robert Jones, 1740 to 1843, called Dick Aberdaron. He came to Liverpool in 1804. He was famous for his love of languages. He had a smattering of some 15 languages. He loved cats. He had about 20 of them. And he had a wheelbarrow where he slept under it on his travels from North Wales to Liverpool, and also to keep his books and his dictionaries and the work that he was doing in trying to make a dictionary of Hebrew Welsh dictionary. But what William Roscoe did was to give him a house where he could be safe. And in the 10 years of his life, itinerant life, he stayed in Liverpool because of William Roscoe. The most important Welshman to receive the patronage of Roscoe was the one that I've already shown you, John Gibson, and his brother Solomon, 1796 to 1866. He was also a wonderful sculptor. It was the links with Roscoe that changed the lives of these brothers. And they moved, as I said, to Rome, and his work is so important. And the third brother, Benjamin Gibson, born in Liverpool in 1811, became an assistant to his eldest brother, John, out in Rome, and died there in 1837. Another interesting person that came to Liverpool was Betsy Cadwallader. She ran away from Bala at the age of 14. She was one of 10 children. Her father was a preacher, David Cadwallader. He used to come to Pall Mall Chapel. She ran away, came to Liverpool, found people that she knew of, and she became famous in the Crimean War in her assistance to Florence Nightingale. And she changed her name because people in Liverpool couldn't say Cadwallader. They couldn't say Miss Cadwallader, so she called herself Davis, Elizabeth Davis. And she found work as a maid with Sir George Drinkwater, and came to know many of the important politicians of Liverpool, like George Canning, and the parliamentary elections of those days. So while a number of talented Welsh people were helped by Liverpool leaders, most of those who came were able to settle in the new environment because they themselves had made centres, built chapels as social centres and religious centres. And every denomination did the same. The Welsh Presbyterians, or otherwise known as Welsh Calvinistic Methodists, they had, by 1837, they had 4 chapels: Pall Mall, then they had Bedford Street, then they had Rose Place, and they had Burlington Street. Then the Wesleyan Welsh Methodists began in Midgall Street. The Welsh Independents were thinking of going over to America. Most of them were from Llanbrynmair, and on the way out to the Irish Sea, the boat nearly sank. They came back, like Mrs. Gibson, they stayed in Liverpool and started a Welsh chapel in Cavendish Street. And then the Welsh Baptists, they were in Bevington Brew. And the Welsh Anglicans opened a Welsh school for poor Welsh children in Russell Street in 1804, one of the first ragged schools in Liverpool. And then in 1825, Liverpool Corporation donated land to them to build a church in Brownlow Street, Brownlow Hill, and donated £60 towards the cost of maintaining a vicar in that church. One of the outstanding contributions of the Liverpool Welsh was its activity as missionaries, and in particular, the setting up of a Welsh Missionary Society in 1840 to go out to India. They were, before that, belonging to the London Missionary Society, but they were refusing to send missionaries to the places they wanted to go. So in the end, they made a new DI in Liverpool and started a Welsh Missionary Society and decided to go out to Shillong and Northeast India, Assam, Mizo Hills. Today is one of the most flourishing Christian communities in the world, in the Mizo Hills. 95% of the people of the Mizo Hills are Christians. And many people went from Liverpool as missionaries, 2 in particular, Dr. Gordon Roberts. He was from Catherine Street. And I've written a book on him because this year is the centenary of the hospital he began in Shillong. It was opened in 1922. And it's done a marvelous day's work in that city. And he was followed by Dr. Arthur Hughes, who, when he was there for 30 years, and when he retired, he came back to live in Allerton, in Green Lane, and died in 1996. And I've also written a great deal on him as well. So from 1840 till the year 1970, when India resisted having Welsh missionaries in Northeast India, some 300 missionaries had gone out from Liverpool. Not all Liverpool people, but from all parts of Wales and Manchester and London and Wales as missionaries to work in schools, colleges, hospitals, and mission work. So I move on now to my second set of slides. And I'm going to show you the first one of a very innovative pioneer of Welsh publishing in Liverpool, Hugh Evans of the Brython Press. He came from the area around Cerrig-y-Drudion, Llangw, to work for Isaac Fawkes, and began his own firm, Brython Press, in Stanley Road in 1906. And from there onwards till 1977, they became one of the large Welsh publishing houses. They published hundreds of books and also began a newspaper, a weekly newspaper called the Brython, the Briton, from 1906 to 1939. And we move on to the editor of that magazine, of that weekly newspaper, J.H. Jones. He started as a compositor, and there he is in that photograph as a compositor of with Isaac Fawkes and then with Hugh Evans, and became the editor. He was a great editor, and he was known as J.H. And he could write interesting articles, and first-class editor. And then we move on to one of the pioneers of medicine in Liverpool, Hugh Owen Thomas. 5 brothers who were the pioneers of orthopedic medicine. Hugh Owen Thomas deserves a lecture on his own. He had a cigarette in his mouth all day long. And that's why he died at the age of 55. But he worked hard for the Liverpool people. He started his round at 6 o'clock in the morning and then came back for the afternoon. He came back for breakfast, which was only a banana, and then started surgery. And then in the evening went out to visitations again, wrote books, and was a first-class doctor, and was responsible for the Thomas Splint, which saved so many lives in the First World War. And then we move on to another Liverpool Welshman, Saunders Lewis. He was trained in, he was a son of a minister, grandson of Owen Thomas, Dr. Owen Thomas of Princes Road. And he was a man who started the Welsh Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru. And he was trained in Wallasey, educated in Wallasey, and also in the University of Liverpool, where he gained first-class honours in English and made his research under J. Glyn Davies, and became a poet and a playwright, and also a literary critic. And we move on to Catherine Street, which was built by a Welsh builder, William Jones, also from Cerrig-y-Drudion, and he called this street after the name of his mother. So it's a different Catherine. This is spelled in a different way to the ordinary Catherine. And he was a very fine builder. He built also Upper Duke Street and Parliament Street. And he came to Liverpool in his building 1840. And it was in this building there, 46 Catherine Street, was the home of Dr. Owen Thomas that I've mentioned. And then we move back to medicine, and we have a photograph. No, we were still with Dr. Owen. This is Dr. Owen Thomas that I mentioned. He came to Liverpool in 1865 to Netherfield Road, moved in 1871 to the large Welsh cathedral in Princess Road, and built the church into a huge, attractive church with loads of people going there on a Sunday to listen to him. He was a great Welsh orator, the preacher of the people, he was called. And we move on to another Thomas, I think, Ivan Thomas. He's the father of Hugh Owen Thomas, and he came as a bone setter to Liverpool, but he didn't have any qualifications. And the doctors in Liverpool were very, well, they were after him. And he was taken on to court 6 times and always innocent. And he decided that when his sons would want to be doctors, and 5 of them decided out of 7 children, he had 5 sons and 2 daughters, and the 5 sons were taught in Edinburgh School of Medicine. He made up for his own lack of qualifications. We move on to John Roberts, and this is the John Roberts who became the MP for Flint Boroughs. He was a son of a very powerful Welsh timber merchant called David Roberts, who lived in Hope Street. And John Roberts was the son of that David Roberts. They were from Llanrwst originally, and he built his own house, also his mansion in Abergele. And he was very kind to Owen Thomas, and an elder. Both of them were elders in Princess Road. So we move on to the world of building. It's not a very good one of Owen Elias. He was one of the large Welsh builders, and he built in Everton. And he was called the King of Everton. He had 2 brothers working with him, and they did a great deal of work in Anfield and Kirkdale and Everton especially. So we move back now to Princess Road. This was it looks, it's in the hands of a trust, but they've been so slow. I'm after them all the time to make this up as it should be. It's a fine building, and at one time it was the largest spire in Liverpool, and a very attractive cathedral for the Welsh community. So we move back to medicine after this photograph, to Sir Robert Jones, who was who worked with it wasn't his uncle, the wife of Hugh Owen Thomas, Elizabeth, was an aunt to Robert Jones, and they adopted him when he lost his father and came to live with them. And he was a very fine specialist in the Southern Hospital, and also in his own place in Nelson Street, where Hugh Owen Thomas used to have his surgery and hospital. And Robert Jones, when he died in 1933, his remains were laid in the Anglican Cathedral, a rare honor to anyone. So, a very fine Liverpool Welshman. And we move on to show you the chapel where Dr. John Thomas, we saw him on the other slides, where he moved from Crosshall Street to this tabernacle Netherfield Road, which became later on, in my time in Liverpool, the Mary Fowler Salvation Army place. And then I show you the last photograph. Last slide is the Rialto. Why the Rialto? Because the Rialto was the early work of a distinguished Welshman of the 20th century in Liverpool, D.J. Lewis, who was for years on the City Council, was the Lord Mayor of Liverpool in 1962. And he belonged to our church in Liverpool. And I was the one who officiated at his funeral in Aberystwyth. He was a man from Aberystwyth. But this was one of his fine works that were destroyed in the Liverpool riots of 1981, which is very sad. So there we are. Those are the other aspects of the Liverpool Welsh. And we go back now to the Liverpool Welsh builders, because they were responsible for 2/3 of Liverpool. They had access to the finest raw materials, and within a period of William Jones and those people that I mentioned, Owen Elias, they began to build 4-roomed houses that were very attractive for people. And then they moved on to build 6-room houses with 3 bedrooms as well. And their outstanding houses are still to be seen in Menlove Avenue, Allerton Drive, where I live, Garth Drive, because the man who built Garth Drive was J.W. Jones. He had his offices in Allerton Road, where Iceland is to be seen today. And J.W. Jones built Garth Drive, came to live in the top house, called it Wraithog. He also built Tannet Drive, called it Garth Drive, and he called Tannet Drive after Tannet Valley, where his wife hailed from. And also in Aigburth and Mosley Hill. And these houses today are selling from 600,000 to 800,000. The Welsh houses became popular. They were sold in the 1850s for £140 to £160, rising to £180 and £220 in the 1870s. A lot of money in those days, you know. And the style of the houses by the Welsh were exported into the 20th century from the 19th, and some of them went on a large scale. Some of them not only built large estates in Liverpool, they also built large estates elsewhere. One example I'll give you, John Hughes, Mornavion in Green Lane. He was born in 1863, died in 1936, originally from Llanryddelad in Anglesey. He was responsible for housing estates in Norris Green, the Kenton Estate in London, and the Shirley Estate in Birmingham. He constructed every kind of building, cottages, detached houses, rows of houses, schools, flats, warehouses, shops. And these Welsh builders made a huge profit. They became millionaires, with the result that their children didn't have to work, or their grandchildren. The only thing they had to do was to collect rents. And when I first came to Liverpool, there were half a dozen of them still around. They didn't do anything except every week or every month, they would collect the rents. And one of them, I remember well, his father had left him all the houses in Cunard City in Walton, 280 houses. He employed one man to help him because he didn't want to ask anybody else to do any work on those houses. If a slate was missing, he'd put it back. But the main thing he did, he called himself a builder, but the main thing he did was to collect the rents and enjoy money. And when he died in 2002, the Liverpool Echo said that he was the most wealthy man in Liverpool. And they were. The Welsh middle class, the Welsh have never had a middle class till Liverpool. Welsh began the phenomenon of a middle class. The Welsh were always working class. The Welsh word is gwerin, which you can't translate, which means more than peasants, but less than working class, somewhere in between. And here in Liverpool, you had a phenomenon of the first middle class community among the Welsh nation, anywhere in the world. And they pleased people in trade like Owen Owens, T.G. Hughes, Peter Williams, drapers, shopkeepers. They made huge money. And they gave their children the best education possible. I'm going to mention one or two of those children. First generation Liverpool Welsh. The first example is Sir Edward Lloyd, 1861, 1947. Son of Edward Lloyd of Grove Street, a wealthy businessman. His son was educated in a private school, University of Wales, Aberystwyth, and then to Lincoln College, Oxford. And there he showed his talents, gaining first-class honours in Greek and Latin, and first-class honours the following year in history. And in the middle of the degree course, he won the main prize in the National Eisteddfod of Wales that came to Liverpool in 1884 for a book on a handbook on the history of Wales up to 1282. He gained a lectureship in Aberystwyth, then to Bangor, where he was appointed professor of history. And like Sir Robert Jones and many other Liverpool men of medicine, he was a proper Liverpool Welsh. What is a Liverpool Welsh? There are two kinds of Liverpool Welsh. There are those like me and Errol Chitty who've come here from Wales. But there are those who have been born here, and they're different. Usually they can speak Welsh as we can, but they have a different way of looking at things. And there are three things that distinguish them. First of all, their appearance, their dress. When I first came to Liverpool in 1968, I met so many of them. They used to have their Sunday best on in the week. Whenever they appeared in public. Did you see Sir Robert Jones in that photograph? That is a Liverpool Welshman. Not like me, without a tie tonight. And most of you are saying, we're going back to be working class, I think. On every occasion, when they came out to the public, they were well turned out and trim, everything in place. Secondly, they were hugely successful in their profession. They were very ambitious people in medicine, in law, in academic circles. Those privileged men, and one could add so many to them. I showed you Saunders Lewis, but I could have shown you Professor Garmon Jones, who was a professor of history at the Liverpool University and a librarian of the university. I mean, I could have shown you William Peredur Jones, the son of J.H. Jones, the editor, who became the professor of economic history at the University of Sheffield. And I could add Professor Richard Allen Morton, who lived in Green Hill Road, professor at the University of Liverpool, and a world leader in the field of biochemistry. These were products of the Liverpool Welsh middle class up to the First World War period. The Welsh-speaking middle class maintained a wide spectrum of activities, choirs, culminating in the formation of the Liverpool Welsh Choral Union. And then they produced their own institutions, 90 Liverpool Welsh chapels and mission halls. The temperance movement began among them. And then they became the city of Welsh publishing, with people like William Rees and Isaac Fawkes and Hugh Evans. And then they launched their papers. And we have carried on since then with our less, well, not so good papers as they had, the Angor and the Glanne and the Bont. Now I'm going to show a few more slides. I'm afraid I'm long-winded tonight, but that won't be long. There's so much to say. You know, this book is 350 pages long. Now then, this is, I must say, he was a Welshman that was responsible for Elder Dempster, Sir Alfred Lewis Jones, remembered at Pierhead in Liverpool, the one who was responsible for the School of Tropical Medicine. He was responsible for the church in Springwood, responsible for the hospital in Garston, Sir Alfred Lewis Jones Hospital. He was a mega man, a man that could move mountains. Another great story in his life. Right. Next, the Welsh Choral Union. This is a delightful photograph of them. They're not all Welsh these days, but they're all Welsh orientated. And they sing the occasional Welsh song, and it's great to be among them. And then we go on to one of the Welsh poets. He was a minister in Grove Street after William Rees. His name was David Adams, called Howyn, a great theologian and a very intellectual person. Then I want to show you a very fine building which is still in existence, Chatham Street Chapel, which is now part of the University of Liverpool School of Business Studies. And that has got a long history to it. And so we move on to the Welsh streets. There they are, which we fought successfully, half a dozen of us, to defeat the city of Liverpool, who wanted to pull them down. But we had one great advantage. Ringo Starr was born in Madrid Street, and they wouldn't dare to take those streets down once we mentioned his name. So we won the battle, and now they're going to, hopefully, going to make something of it. Voila Street, Rhywla Street, Madrid Street, Gwydir Street. And then we move on to the National Eisteddfod of Wales in 1929 in Sefton Park. Isn't it a marvelous photograph? I've tried to have the Eisteddfod to come back to Liverpool, but I've been beaten by the narrow-minded Welsh nationalists back in Wales who didn't want it to come to a foreign land. But it would have been the success of the Eisteddfod would have if it came to Liverpool. Look, we've got Sefton Park, but I wanted to have it in Aintree, which would bring it all together, and the great roads to bring the people from North Wales to Aintree. But there we are. Someone else might get it one day. So is there any more, Mike? The last? Oh, there's one, yeah. We held for the National Eisteddfod that came to Birkenhead, and the poet was Hay the Wyn. Humphrey Evans was killed in Pilcombe Ridge in 1917. And when it was announced, it was a black chair. And here you have the celebrities of the festival I held in Birkenhead Park in 2017 to remember the centenary of the black chair Eisteddfod. So thank you very much for those slides. Now the Liverpool Welsh have enjoyed themselves in Liverpool, especially football. And I think the bulk of the Liverpool Welsh at one time were in favour of Everton. They were Everton supporters. It's changing these days. A lot of the North Walians and Liverpool Welsh supporting Liverpool these days. But in those years, they had so many great Welsh players playing for Everton, like Thomas George Jones, TG, as he was fondly known, played 178 times for Everton. He was counted as one of the giants by Stanley Matthews and Tommy Lawton and Joe Mercer, his friends, and even Dixie Dean said that. And he was honoured in 2000 by the first Everton player to be chosen as Millennium Giant. Di Davies, the goalkeeper that I knew very well, he was there. And also we had a great man as goalkeeper, Neville Southall. So we've got great memories of Liverpool and Everton. Liverpool, of course, had John Toshak and Ian Rush, who still comes from Flint every game to Anfield. So the Liverpool Welsh in our day are found mainly in the suburbs: Allerton, Osley Hill, Childwell, Woolton, Aigburth, Waterloo, Crosby, and some in Gattaca. And the establishment of the Merseyside Welsh Heritage Society in 2000 has meant a great deal of activity, and we've played our part in remembering these great names that I have just touched upon this evening. You've been a wonderful audience, and I can see from your faces that you enjoyed the talk, and perhaps one day someone will ask you, do you want a present? One of your family say, what present would you like to have? And you'll say, well, I wouldn't mind having a copy of The Remarkable History of the Liverpool Welsh by D. Ben Rees. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.